ready to get started? It's a nice crowd. Glad to see so many people here. I see there's still a few headlights I see coming in the parking lots. We may have a few stragglers coming in. If you need to, though, feel free to close those back doors if you're near the back and have a hard time hearing. Again, this is a Common Core standards debate, but it is also a discussion. One of the goals tonight is to get information out, reach a better understanding from all sides, those who have concerns, those who are very supportive. And we had more questions sent in from our listeners over this debate than I think any candidate debate or even the open space initiative a few years ago, which to date have been our most hot topic. So the questions that you'll hear tonight are a collection of questions that came from our newsroom, questions that came primarily, there have been questions that came from listeners and those who were interested in the debate itself. Many of the questions were very similar, so what we've done is we've grouped them together in like topics, if you will. And again, we're going to be a bit informal about this tonight. We will be using times and limitations just to help us get through the information as fast as we can, or get through as much as we can. But should a discussion erupt on stage, we're going to allow for that. Back and forth. Everybody be quiet. Cinderella Billiard has just entered the room. Really waved in that. This is, again, the interest of keeping this a bit informal is to have that discussion. But I would ask the crowd, because there is so much information here, because we are going to be limited on time, unless all of you want to stay all night to get to the end of this, I would ask that we withhold all audience reaction. We are going to open things up at a certain point towards the end. There will be plenty of time to have a discussion. Everyone on the panel, plus others who are here in the audience, off stage, will be here to answer questions. So let's try and keep things moving as fast as possible. And to help me do that, again, if we can refrain from cheering, clapping, booing, hissing. Once in a while, I'll turn around and glance and try to gauge the audience. If I see a lot of raised eyebrows or one eye a little open more than the other, maybe we'll pause on that question and spend some more time on it. So, I'm Jason Williams, by the way, from KVNU. I host KVNU's Spring People, and we'll quickly here do a little introduction of our panel for this debate. And thanks again for everyone who showed up. Quickly, outside of the time frame, if you could all just maybe starting over here on the left, go across and just give a quick introduction for yourself and why you're on stage.
My name is Wendy Hart. I am a member of... Oh, you can't hear me? It's always my phone. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. My name is Wendy Hart. I am a member of the Alpine School Board. I represent the cities of Highland, Alpine, and Cedar Hills. I am a mom of 3. I have a bachelor's degree in math, and I am here representing myself, not the Alpine School Board. That's important to know, but there are 2 additional members of my board that do support what I'm saying. I was born in Salt Lake, raised in Cupertino, California, and came back here to BYU and had, just stayed. I have 3 children, and I'm here, I guess, because I'm interested in education and in this debate and public input.
My name is Alyson Williams, and I have 4 children. I'm currently living in Spanish Fork. 2 of my oldest kids are in public school in the Naval School District. Publishing technology as well. I am here tonight as a mother who is concerned about the opportunities that my children will have in their public school education. And I've been vocal about that and written different things and tried to talk to my representative to parents and concerned citizens. It's an opportunity that I feel should have happened maybe a long time ago, but I am really grateful that it's happening tonight. I thank the organizers for putting it together.
My name is Thomas, and I'm a member of the State Board of Education. I represent Davis and Weber counties, and as a profession, I'm an attorney. I certainly had an interest in public education for many years. Years ago, I was in the Utah State Senate. I was the chair of the Standing Committee on Education. I do have 4 kids, 2 of whom go to Utah State, which are pastors. We'll see how it goes. The reason why I'm here is to provide as much information as possible concerning the Common Core standard.
And I'm Tami Pyfer. I'm also on the Utah State Board of Education. I'm just finishing my 4th year on the state board. I have 5 children, all of whom have gone through local public schools. I've also done a little bit of homeschooling and just done in private school for a year. And so I'm very interested in public education. I'm here also with Dave to give as much information as possible. I'm very appreciative of those of you who have come out tonight to hear more about the Common Core standards and to have your questions hopefully addressed. One of the positive things that I have seen come out of some of the recent controversy, so to speak, or misunderstanding about some of the issues with the core standards is an increase in community awareness, parent involvement. I think that's always a good thing. And so I've been excited to see more people becoming engaged and involved and concerned with public education.
All right, thanks to all of you, and I just want to throw this out as well. Thanks for taking the time to do this. This is, to my knowledge, the first event of this type, so we should all be proud. You guys as well. All right, the first question, we decided to start off with probably the most difficult question and give you, of course, the most time for this. So we have 3 minutes each to answer. You can fight amongst yourselves on who on which table answers each time. This is not too bad. We'll start out. We did a coin toss back at the station, and you guys actually won the coin toss, and we consider it a win going second. So you'll go second on this question. So for you guys, Dave and Tami first, we'll have a similar question for the other table, but what is Common Core, and why do you feel that it is the right direction for Utah to go?
I'm just going to briefly start. The Common Core standards are standards or benchmarks or expectations. A lot of people say Common Core as though it were a program. Common Core is short for Common Core Standards, and it's part of an initiative called the Common Core State Standards Initiative. So Common Core are standards which are simply expectations or benchmarks, academic benchmarks, things that we think students should be able to perform at particular grade levels. That's what the Common Core Standards are.
The Common Core Initiative came out of a study in 2008 by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And those organizations are controlled by the state, they're controlled by governors and state superintendents. And they commissioned a study in 2008 wanting to know how states could be competitive in the 21st century marketplace. And one of the main things that came out of that study was a need to upgrade the standards for K through 12. And from that was a kickoff meeting in March 2009, and they invited everyone to participate, liberals, moderates, conservatives, from the Business Roundtable, U.S. Chamber of Commerce to the Gates Foundation, a large net, as it were. They invited everyone to participate except one entity, and that was the federal government. And that's because they wanted this to be a state-run effort to look at state standards. The feds were not real happy with that being excluded. In May of 2009, the reality is that state school boards are the ones who adopt standards. And so the Common Core Initiative went out to all the states, asked them to participate. 48 states elected to participate in the Common Core initiative. There were math work teams and feedback groups, both in mathematics and English language arts. Many experts, 72 in math, 62 in English language arts, including many university professors. They came out with a first draft in August 2009. In September of that year, set it out for public comment, 30-day comment period. Additional drafts were then done. In March of 2010, there was an additional 30-day comment period, followed by peer review by a panel of 28 experts who voted 24-4 to approve the standards. The standard came out in June 2010. In July of 2010, the state board sent out for public comment Common Core standards. In the meantime, in July, the Fordham Institute, an independent conservative think tank, looked at the standards, graded the standards, and they were higher standards than what Utah had before.
Dave, we'll have to cut you off there.
To be continued.
With the time frame, but if you'd like to just finish that sentence, go ahead.
Just that between Fordham Institute and the ACT, they all endorsed the standards, and the state board adopted the standards in August of 2010.
Okay. All right. Same question in a way for you, Alyson and Wendy, whichever or both of you decides to answer. What is Common Core to you, and specifically where you are here expressing concerns about Common Core, what is an alternative you would accept?
So I appreciate Dave and Tammy talking about the Common Core state standards, and I agree, Common Core has become kind of a nickname for the other three stimulus-driven reforms. So Common Core state standards were, standards that were common to all the states was I did introduce with the stimulus bill. First in the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, second in the Race to the Top grant application or grant competition, and then the Race to the Top grant competition for assessments, and then through our No Child Left Behind waivers. So 4 federal programs that outline the exact same 4 federal education reforms. The first one of those is Common Core standards and assessments, and then the second was identifying low-performing schools and how we would turn those around. The third was teacher accountability rules, and the fourth was pre-kindergarten to college and career data systems. So we see the Common Core standards as one part of education reform package that has been largely driven by the stimulus bill through various programs.
I think it's also important to note that when the State Board was presented with information about signing on to the development of the Common Core Standards Initiative, this is from the May 2009 State Board meeting, a quote from Associate Superintendent Brenda Hale. She says, as part of some of the efforts going on with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the stimulus of 2009, one of the things that's been under discussion is whether or not we want to join with other states to come up with Common Core standards. She goes on to explain a little bit about it, and then as we jump down, she says another con, she's talking about pros and cons to this, is although states are going to have lots of impact, they are not going to allow the states to take a team to be a part of this. We can suggest individuals to serve on the standards team, but they don't want to end up don't want it to end up being like the Constitutional Convention. So the states were marginally involved, and it's important to note that the organization that they based the standards on to begin with was the Achieve Incorporated, and they were created by the National Governors Association. The board of directors is comprised of both governors and business people, and so it would be applicable to say that it is a business-led venture as well as saying it's a state-led venture, because those who started out with the standards were controlled both by states and by businesses. But it was not the states themselves. They signed on to it. They received the standards, but they themselves were not able to take a team to be a part of the development. So I think that's an important distinction.
All right, thanks to everyone again. Great setup to the discussion here. We will, of course, throughout this debate, have the opportunity for a rebuttal if either side would like to take it. We'll keep rebuttals limited to 1 minute. So to kick things off here, it's been mentioned a couple times by both tables now. Curriculum was one of the main topics of the questions we received on Common Core standards. If you can, speak a little bit to Utah's involvement under a Common Core standard system in curriculum, and also then as you prepare for your question, speak about your concerns about that, and same theme to the opening statement question, what would be a preferable alternative for you? So start with Tami and Dave. When it comes to curriculum, 2 minutes, what is Utah's involvement?
In Utah, we may do it different than other states. Standards or expectations are not the same as a curriculum. We printed out some guidelines from PTA to give parents an idea what these expectations or standards are at each grade level. I'm going to read a couple from the first grade to show you the difference between a standard or an expectation and a curriculum. So in first grade, these are examples of the skills or standards that first graders would be working on. Identifying the correct meaning for a word with multiple meanings based on the sentence or paragraph in which the word is used. For example, deciding whether the word bat means a flying mammal or a club used in baseball. So that's an example of a standard. That's it. There's no curriculum. There's no textbook attached to this. There's no teaching method that says this is how you will teach this. The standard says what we want students to be able to know or learn at that grade level. And a curriculum is how we will teach that. What's the pedagogy? What are the instructional materials? What are the textbooks that will be used? In Utah, those decisions are made at the local level. I don't know how it's done in other states. But in Utah, the State Board of Education does not even make those decisions. They're made at the local school district or the local charter school level. And so it's two very different things. We adopted standards. We did not adopt a curriculum.
Same question for you, of course, with the twist of what is your experience or your opinion of how curriculum being developed in Utah in a Common Core standard setting, and what would be a preferred alternative in your mind?
We acknowledge that standards are the specific, what Tami said. What is always left out of this, we're told it's just standards, but it's also standards and assessments. And those are the tests. And you have to understand that what you test is what will end up being taught. And so if you think about it, the standards are like a box, and then you can teach what's inside that box. But there is that limitation, and depending on what is tested is what is going to be emphasized in the classroom. It's important to note that in 2009, Bill Gates, who is a huge funder of the Common Core Standards Initiative, he has this statement you can find on YouTube. He says, last month, 46 governors and chief state school officers made a public commitment to embrace these common standards. And I would add the parenthetical here, the standards had not yet been created, they were in development. This is encouraging, but identifying common standards is not enough. We'll know we've succeeded when the curriculum and the tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests. When the tests are aligned to the common standards, the curriculum will line up as well, and that will unleash powerful market forces in the service of better teaching. And so you can't talk about standards and tests without understanding the linking piece of curriculum that is there. When Alpine School District went out to look for curriculum, it was still being developed. We had a choice of 5 core math books, so we were able to choose within that box of those 4, but we didn't have options for, say, 9th grade because we'd opted for an integrated math approach. And so we're giving our teachers these new standards and saying, now you have to develop a curriculum absent any books. And we know, it's coming along, but beforehand we had to go ahead and, we're making it up on the fly. So that's how standards have been translated into curriculum in Utah. We're making our teachers do it.
All right. We didn't get to the alternative there, but I will point. So, question, rebuttal? Again, at any point, we have given off the option for a rebuttal. So.
Just one point. In terms of the Common Core initiative was about standards. Certainly there are common tests. There are two consortium of states that have entered into those, and they've taken federal money. The state of Utah State Board of Education withdrew about a year and a half ago. We've done our own standard, our own testing, computer adaptive testing. And so we're testing the Utah core standards, not just mathematics and English language arts, but also science. As for, in terms of the curriculum, the textbooks that we've used in the state of Utah have never been aligned to the Utah core standards. That's because the textbooks come from basically the standards from Texas and California. Those are the big markets. So we've really never had that kind of alignment. Now we're starting to see more alignment because of the Common Core. And we've encouraged teachers to go out and certainly look at curriculum and develop it for their classes.
All right. Wendy Hart.
I appreciate the comment about the, I mean, we're getting off the topic here, but the comment about withdrawing from the federally funded tests, and we're very grateful for that. But I would like to point out that one of the major impetuses behind that was that parents who were involved were reading through Race to the Top applications and found a memorandum of understanding that legally obligated us to the Common Core standards if we were involved with this testing. And so that kind of brought that whole thing to the forefront. And I do appreciate that the state board pulled us out of that, because I think that was a huge problem. But there were a lot of things that went into this that people were not aware of at the time that were found by parents.
Do I have time?
10 seconds.
I just want to point out, Dave, you just said that Utah didn't have textbooks before because we weren't a big player in the market, and now we can get curriculum that's nationally developed. Isn't that kind of saying that we can have a national curriculum, national textbooks?
I'll actually bend the rules here a bit for the discussion.
Well, I think Wendy just gave a really great example of locally developed curriculum, where her district, the Alpine School District, was making a decision amongst 5 different textbooks. I don't even know what those textbooks are. I don't know if Logan District is doing the same thing in Ogden, if they're developing their own textbooks. So, I mean, you've already given a good example of how that is all done at the local level.
This does make a nice segue into our next question. Actually, still along the lines of curriculum development, something that's been mentioned by both tables now. What existed before, what existed now. If you can speak a little bit to what, in your mind, the Common Core standards change as opposed to the way things were done before Common Core. And I believe Sophia's last time, so Wendy and Alyson, if you'd like to kick this one up. 2 minutes.
Well, Utah has always had, not always had standards. Utah's had standards for a number of years for math and English language arts and other topics. It hasn't been mentioned yet, so maybe I can mention that with Common Core, we've adopted specifically so far standards for English language arts and math. Utah, in 2007, there were a number of parents who were concerned that Utah's math standards were not up to par. And they pressured the state board and ended up having to go through the legislature to get our standards evaluated and rewritten. So we went through a rewrite of our math standards in 2007 that were rated an A- by the Fordham Foundation. 2 years later, in 2009, we were given the chance to participate with Common Core standards, also rated as an A- by Fordham. And Fordham said about Utah's standards, or previous standards, the standards are generally very strong and cover most of the essential content with both depth and rigor. The high school standards are particularly strong, And they specifically complimented the clarity and how the subjects were tied together. The Utah standards were beautifully presented and generally both clear and specific. When Fordham critiqued the Common Core standards, they gave them a similar grade, but the criticism was that the order of them and the clarity of them wasn't a strong point, and so we feel like in terms of math, especially, it wasn't a necessary advancement for us. Utah also had English language arts standards that were given a lower grade than the Common Core English language arts standards, but I think as we did with the math standards, we as Utahns with open meetings and community involvement are capable of developing high standards that are under our control.
Thank you. And same question for Tammy and Dave now. Again, to repeat the question for those who may not have heard me, all the lawmakers sitting behind me here say I'm talking too quiet. So, to repeat the question again, the Common Core standards as they relate to curriculum, what do they change? How is it different than the way things were done before?
Alyson is correct. Utah has had core standards. They're called the Utah Core Standards. In statute, it's actually called the Utah Core Curriculum. That's because that word was used differently 40 years ago, and it's something we need to change because they're core standards. But we've had those in place since at least 1984 formally. In fact, state code requires the State Board of Education to set these expectations or these standards at each grade level. So those have been in place for a long time. We had recently updated our math standards in 2007. There were some parents, some of the parents that don't like the Common Core standards didn't like the 2007 standards, and they went directly to the legislature, talked to the legislature, and we had 3 legislators, the chairs of the standing education committees, come to the state board and say, your 2007 standards are inadequate. We want world-class standards. They tasked us with looking at the math standards again, even though Fordham had given them an A- rating, and so that's what we did. Interestingly, on one of the handouts that I saw at the door tonight, Dr. Hugo Rossi, who's a professor emeritus at the University of Utah, helped write those 2007 standards, those math standards. And he said this, he said the 2007 Utah Math Core was a strong document, but the new Utah Core standards, the Common Core standards, are even better. They incorporate the idea of integration of content and reliance on student active involvement in context for understanding. Perhaps the opposition feel that the 2007 standards are good enough, something they did not express when opposing them in 2007. So the question is this, is good enough sufficient for our children's education? It wasn't for my parents. And this is from a Utah mathematician who was involved in writing those 2007 standards. The Fordham Institute, their final say on the matter, they said the Common Core provides admirable focus and explicitly requires standard methods and procedures, enhancements that would benefit Utah standards.
Option for rebuttal, of course.
I don't think that information is completely accurate, Tammy. The parents that were pushing for higher standards in 2007 were pushing for a change from the D-rated standards, and the result of that parental pressure on the legislature and the state board was the Utah standards of 2007 that received the A- grade. There was some further critique to the 2007 standards, a few tweaks that they would have additionally liked to add to those standards, but it wasn't the A- rated standards that those parents pressured the legislature to change. It was the D-rated ones that were prior to that.
And I don't believe that's correct, but we'll have to agree to disagree.
You have the option to rebuttal for 1 minute, but all right, do that there, okay. This all has been mentioned a few times already. We've heard the word transparency, I think, has come up, some different dates have come up, all of that. One of the primary concerns that was expressed along these lines by people who emailed in were questions about that, questions about how this process has played out, whether or not the public had a chance to weigh in, whether or not lawmakers had a chance to weigh in. But what we found, of course, is that there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of misunderstanding So if we can, difficult question for both sides here to answer, I know, but if you can, give a 2-minute answer to the basic question of how this process has played out and what could have gone better or what went very well. Your choice. So start with David King.
In terms of the standards themselves, the initial draft came out in August. And the initial draft, as I stated, was drafted by about 164 experts in mathematics and English language arts. And the states were controlling it. And those initial drafts had a 30-day comment period in September 2001. And so the public was able to comment at that time. The State Office of Education had numerous comments. There were other drafts after that. Ultimately, there was another comment period for 30 days in March 2010. They received over 10,000 comments. A lot of the things that our Utah State Office asked to be included in the standards were in fact put in the standards. After the standards came out in June 2010, the State Board of Education opened up another 30-day comment period for the public in the state of Utah. In fact, numerous individuals from the state office went around the state to gain input on those standards. And the standards were ultimately looked at and adopted by the State Board in August of 2010. We had a lot of input. We had individuals in our May 2010 meeting who came in and spoke against the Common Core standards, gave us their input in terms of adopting the Massachusetts standards instead. So we think there was ample in terms of transparency, and people got an opportunity to have their say in terms of the standards and what they were and what they weren't. And we certainly received a lot of input.
All right, same question for Wendy and Alyson. The question again, for those in the audience, how did this process play out as you see it, and what could have gone better or went very well?
Well, it's interesting. I was running for election during all this, and I didn't know anything about it. And I consider myself a very involved parent who's paying attention. One of my fellow board members who was elected at the same time, she'd been a teacher in the classroom for 25 years, was also running for election at the same time. Neither one of us had, been involved in this or had heard anything about it. So our point when we were discussing this a year later, now that our board had to allocate funds to implement the Common Core training, we talked to the curriculum director, Sydney Dixon, at the state office, and she graciously came to our board to answer questions about Common Core and things like that. And both myself and Mrs. Hill brought this up, that, who was involved from our area specifically, what information can you give us, because she said there was a lot of public input. And her response was that it just started coming together about 2 years ago, and she said if it was just Utah that was working on this, of course the canvassing and the publicity would have been very different. But remember, these were about 30 states coming together. And so the concern that I had at the time, I said, but it seems like we had said because we've got 30 states coming together that the public input from other states is now more valuable than the public input from those of us in this state. That as parents and as teachers, as normal everyday people, gatherings like this didn't seem to occur. That if you were paying attention really closely, you could come to the state board and offer comment and opinion. But for those of us that were living our lives, it was not adequately publicized. We were not aware that any of this was going on. And now that it's come through, we're saying, okay, we're done. The first real public forum on it, where there was debate and discussion, was Monday, April 23rd. No, it was 27th, 2012, which was 2 years after the adoption.
Rebecca.
The Utah State Constitution also tasks the State Board for setting those standards. The legislature is not in charge of the standards. Local school districts are not in charge of setting the standards, but it is the responsibility of the State Board of Education to set the standards. That's one of our duties. Curriculum's made at a local level. There's a distribution of power. There's an interesting handout in the hall that shows the structure of public education in Utah. So perhaps the Alpine School Board wasn't as involved in this as they felt like they could be, especially a candidate running for office. It doesn't mean at the state level that our state office personnel didn't have input. They did, and they felt very comfortable that their concerns were addressed in the redrafts of the Common Core standards.
Rebuttal to you.
Thank you. State statute or state code does require that our state board set standards. It does not say that the state board can delegate that function to an outside unelected group, and that's very clear in the non-delegation doctrine of government. And in fact, an interesting thing to me is when our governor came to the state board recently and asked them to consider a different option on our ESEA waiver, which would include having the Board of Regents review standards, the response that they came back is we can't do that. That would be delegating a core function of the board. So how is working with the Board of Regents inside our state unconstitutional, but working with an outside group of unelected people working under confidentiality agreements in private meetings, how is that constitutional? You can't have it both ways.
Please. Let's hold off for the sake of time. Okay, if we can't keep quiet in the audience, we will just pause the debate in the meantime. So if we can have the respect of no cheering or booing until after the debate is finished, I'll have plenty of time to talk to everyone on stage afterwards. But out of respect for everyone here, this is, I'm sorry to say it, not a high school assembly. The question that came up again and again from those who emailed in concerns over Common Core standards, all would mention a specific story. And we realized early on there would be no time to include each specific story. So what we decided to do with this question is ask a very simple question for both of you. What have you heard from students about Common Core standards? And depending on your answer, what is the solution, or what is the part of Common Core standards to focus on that's causing that? Let's start with, I believe, Alyson Williams.
I don't know if this is specifically students, but there is frustration that there is...
And here, please.
Might sink in there a little bit.
Yeah, it's going down. Some of my personal experience, I have a math degree. I have kids that are in this situation. My perception from myself looking at the materials and what my kids are bringing home is that the math specifically is really quite disjointed. What the criticism of Fordham says, that's what I'm seeing. They're taught one topic over here, another topic over here. They're not aligned. They're teaching some things on a lower level than they have the capability. They don't have additional information that would help them have a greater, broader understanding of it. So there is some disjointedness. The most important thing for me, though, is that in our school district and most of the school districts across the state, we used to get to Algebra 1 by 8th grade. And I have a 9th grader, and that is a concern to me. He is currently in an honors program, not because I think he does really well at math, he's acceptable, but because that is the only possible way for him to have the option of taking calculus. Whereas if he were 4 years older, that would have been an automatic option, would have been for him to be able to take calculus as a senior without going through an accelerated program or everything else. Now we call it honors, and we are condensing Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry into 3 years, and pre-calculus into 3 years. Instead of taking the 4 years from 8th grade to 11th grade and allowing for calculus, we're doing it in 3 years. Yes, there are some of those concepts that are taught in 7th and 8th grade beyond that, but those hardcore math concepts, again, as a math major, Algebra 2 is a really hard concept, and yes, we're integrating it, and I understand all of that, but we're basically condensing 4 years of high-level math in high school into 3 years if you want to get into calculus. And that was done by the state board opposite. Common Core doesn't have to go that high. And that's a concern.
I'm just going to give you an example of what I've heard from parents. I don't have children in schools anymore. My youngest son graduated probably 2 years ago, I had an email from a parent who was upset and said, my child doesn't want to know why 2 times 2 equals 4. She just wants to memorize the facts. Quit insisting that she understand why it comes out that way. About a month later, I had another parent come up to me at an event and said, you know, my daughter keeps coming home saying, Mom, I get it. I get why 2 times 2 equals 4. Let me show you how. And this parent said that all the daughter could keep talking about were all these math problems she was doing in school and how excited she was that she finally got how it worked. And I think that it's showing you the new way that we're doing math perhaps is troubling to some parents, but what I'm hearing from teachers in elementary schools in particular are the kids are excited about this. They get it. My daughter who teaches in an elementary school is sitting in on these classes going, I've never seen the kids question so many times, why, and then want to get their hands on the materials on the assignment to start proving why that works. And so I'm hearing good feedback at that level.
And let me just comment on the integrated model. You know, we've been going, the Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 is typically the course in the United States. What we've been finding is that between math and English, by the time our students got to be freshmen in college, they'd have to, about 40% of them would need remedial math or remedial English. So that wasn't working. So we looked at an integrated math model because that's what the top performing nations in the world do. They use integrated math. Singapore math is an integrated math model. And the integrated math model isn't basically shoving 4 years into 3. You actually start Algebra 1 principles in 5th grade. And it goes throughout 10th grade. So you have all of these integrated together. You do have an option of doing honors if you want to go into calculus. And I don't know that that's really that different than what we had before.
Appreciate the answers from all of you. Another simple question, but will require a difficult answer, I'm sure. No Child Left Behind left a lot of concerns on the minds of Utah parents and parents throughout the nation. There are also federal reforms happening now in various areas of education. Can you speak to Common Core standards as they exist and will be implemented and are being implemented here in Utah, and the difference between federal reforms, or lack thereof if you feel there is none? Start with David Taylor.
Basically, when the Common Core Standards initiative came out, like I said, the federal government was excluded from the development of those standards. They were not happy with that. As a result, they tried 3 incursions into Common Core in order to incentivize it. One was Race to the Top. Utah did not receive any money from Race to the Top. And when the state board adopted the Common Core standards in August of 2010, there was no federal incentive for the state board to do that. We've already talked about the testing consortiums. They were given some federal monies. The state of Utah, the state board withdrew. Actually, we didn't withdraw because parents pointed out provisions in the MOA. We had always intended to pull out because we always wanted to do our own. But we did want to find out as much as we could from other states. With regard to the last is the ESEA waivers. And certainly those are concerns. It takes longer than 3 minutes to talk about the ESEA waivers, waiver to No Child Left Behind, and why the state board took the position it took. I don't know if we're going to have time to do that or not, but in essence, you've got No Child Left Behind, which set up some goals. And the goals were reading proficiency and mathematics proficiency during various years, ultimately leading up to 2014, where there was going to be 100% proficiency in all schools in reading and mathematics in 4th and 8th grade. Well, obviously that's an impossible standard. And what happens if you fail the standards along the way, you don't meet AYP, adequate yearly progress. If you have 2 years of your school failing it becomes a failed school subject to federal turnaround laws. The reality is that that 2014 date was supposed to be changed when ESEA, No Child Left Behind, was reauthorized in 2005. That never happened.
I want to stop you there, but I think finishes your idea. And for you guys, of course, same question.
I can respond. Okay.
Sure.
Just really quick, I want to mention something because Dave's repeated it twice now, saying that the feds were not happy that they weren't involved in the Common Core. I think that's funny to know who is the feds and what they were feeling about it. But the facts that I can ascertain are that the three organizations that wrote or were responsible for developing the Common Core State Standards, ACHIEVE, the National Governors Association, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, all do receive federal grant money. Secretary Arnie Duncan himself was at the Council of Chief State School Officers meeting on March 10th in 2009, and he's spoken repeatedly about it. There were, so I don't know, I mean, you can determine if you think that they were completely left out of the process or not. No Child Left Behind waivers, so that was the third incentive that the federal government used after the Race to the Top money ran out.
I'm sorry.
That was short.
It was a minute goes by fast. Rebuttal 1 minute.
I'm just curious if Wendy and Alyson are suggesting they prefer that we stay within these mandates of No Child Left Behind and fall under federal intrusion and turnaround models, or if they would prefer that we have states manage standards that are controlled by the state of Utah.
We can, at this point, bend the rules a bit if you'd like to respond to the question.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to clarify that, Tammy. And I can't speak for everybody, but yes, we think that Utah should have full control of their own standards without it being diluted with processes that take in all the other states. And in terms of No Child Left Behind, we can see that Utah's in a tough position in terms of the AYP, the Adequate Yearly Progress. My question is, if all these governors can get together and put pressure on their constituents to adopt common standards, why couldn't all the governors get together and put pressure on the federal government to give us true congressional relief from No Child Left Behind?
That would be a question for our congressman. It is 7 years overdue.
And I was in D.C. in our congressman's office in March of 2010, asking this very thing. It needs to be reauthorized to take away a lot of the bad parts of No Child Left Behind, and it's still not done.
Definitely a challenge. And this is a great segue into a question that I've been dying to ask myself. This was actually, I begged this parent to let us use her name. She preferred we didn't, but I thought it was such a great question, but I'm sorry we can't. She deserves credit for this one. She asked if we could ask everyone on stage tonight to put themselves on the other table. And so, for example, Wendy, you and Alyson, say something about Common Core standards or about standards in general that you believe is important, good, or something to focus on. For Tammy and Dave, the question for you then would be something about Common Core standards or standards in general that is a risk or a concern that we need to be very aware of and watch for. Start with Tammy and Dave this time.
When the state board voted to participate in a Common Core initiative, it was 14-1. I was the dissenting vote. I'm originally from Washington, D.C. Not many people can say that. I was actually born in the District of Columbia. I have great skepticism with regard to the federal government. And I was concerned that there would be federal intrusion. And I continue to have that skepticism. I mean, I voted for the Common Core standards in August 2010 because I was convinced in the end the feds had not participated in the development of the standards. But I knew full well they were trying to these incursions into the Common Core, and I'm still concerned about it. And I can understand the concerns about federal intrusion because, like I said, I've seen it all my life, and I've been back in D.C. a couple of times to talk to the Department of Education to tell them to stay out of the Common Core initiative, and they politely ignore them. So I do have that concern. I can understand it.
The implication, I think, sometimes is that those of us who have concerns with this set of standards and this set of reform packages is that we don't want standards, and we don't. I've heard people say, well, we just are opposed to higher standards and rigor and don't want our kids to work hard. My kids would dispute that, by the way. No, absolutely. I mean, I fully applaud what the state board did in 2007, reading Fordham's recommendation on the math. I was one of those parents that didn't like the fuzzy math that we were doing in Alpine School District. And I do want, as a math major, as a math person, I'm a math geek, and I want those higher, more rigorous standards. But I feel that when we do it as a big group, I don't think that we can say that there is one set of standards that will make everybody, that you can lead everybody to educational success through one set of standards. And so what I would really appreciate is that this, as Tami had mentioned, this debate, this public involvement, this is what education is all about, is having parents who are paying attention, who are looking at what their kids are learning and wanting to be involved and wanting this whole process, I think, is absolutely wonderful.
Next question here, along those same lines, parental involvement, parental feedback, and the broader question of Common Core standards, or again, standards in general. What mechanisms are in place to make adjustments, to adapt as we learn more about what's working and not working? And are those mechanisms there? We need to take a closer look at that. And start with you guys if you know. Oh, I'm sorry, no, we started with you last time.
Started with us last time, but we're happy to go first anyway.
I'll just
talk briefly about the mechanisms in place. This has been happening since 1984. We review our standards, we update the standards on about a 5 to 7 year cycle. It's been happening for years. The process is that we meet with our USOE staff. Dave's been there longer than I am, so I'm going to summarize what I have experienced so far. Our staff, we meet with our staff, they go to experts in the field, they go to experts, they all belong to national organizations. The fact that our governor might speak to other governors, I don't think is a bad thing for Utah. The fact that our kids take national tests, like the ACT test and the SAT test, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing for our students. So we have mechanisms to get input into the standards. We can change our standards. We've already added to the Common Core standards by adding a standard in cursive writing. When the standards came out, we had feedback from parents saying, you got rid of cursive writing. Well, we never had standards in cursive writing. We never, in the past, have had that standard because it was assumed that we would teach our kids cursive writing. The new Common Core standards came out, they didn't have a standard. We hadn't gotten rid of anything. But we took the additional step of adding a standard in cursive writing to make sure that in Utah, teachers knew that we still have that expectation for our students. So that's just an ongoing process that's been happening for years.
Same question.
I want to go to it from a parental involvement point of view, and I know I think maybe you guys have said this is water under the bridge, but I think it's important to review this process that we've just gone through so that we can move forward, maybe doing it a little bit better next time. Dave kind of went over the timeline a little bit, and he kind of interchangeably threw around what was the public comment period for the national consortium and what was the public comment period in Utah. Basically, there wasn't a real publicly announced forum or way for average parents who aren't on state school boards, who wouldn't be in those meetings, to participate. He mentioned a May 2010 board meeting. I actually did go back and review those minutes. The parents commenting in that meeting were not commenting on the Common Core standards. They were commenting on some social studies standards that were also being discussed at that time.
There was kind of an appendage comment, by the way, on the Common Core. So there was an actual
That was the
Common Core
next
standard.
meeting.
Oh, was that the next?
That was the next.
Okay. But anyway, it wasn't that wasn't the focus of the comment.
But what happened from a parent point of view is the final draft of the Common Core Standards was released on June 2nd, 2010. On June 4th, 2 days later, the State Board was encouraged to vote to adopt the Common Core Standards on the first reading and it specifically just talks about race to the top purposes, so 2 days review time. And then a month later, they did kind of an additional vote, and so there was a month of, supposedly a public comment period that wasn't really well publicized, and then we were rejected from race to the top after we had done that. And like Wendy mentioned before, it wasn't until about 2 years later, 22 months exactly after we officially adopted the Common Core State Standards in August of 2010, that there was a public meeting for just the average citizen to come and talk about that.
Can I just make a quick clarification? When we vote on issues at the State Board, we have 3 readings. If we adopt it on first reading, that means it goes to a second reading, and then if we adopt it on a second reading, it goes to a third reading. It's very similar to what they do in the legislature. To say that it was adopted on first reading, as the comments were in the Herald Journal yesterday, or that it was somehow rushed and adopted on first reading, that's how it makes it to second reading and third reading. So the first reading was in a committee in June, on the June 2nd or June 4th meeting. Then it goes to the full board as a second reading, and then we had a board retreat where we discussed it later in June, and then in the August meeting, we didn't meet in July, in the August meeting, then we passed it on third reading. That's how the readings work.
1 minute rebuttal to the rebuttal.
And I just want to make a point that, and then if I can kind of, so what Tami is saying, if I understand correctly, that even with the second reading and the final adoption in August, do you consider that short period of time with no public publicity adequate for citizen input on something that affects their kids? Also just wanted to mention that the actual standards development and the feedback was all covered under confidentiality agreements and held in private. That's from Dane Lynn from the National Governors Association. He said some of the states sent teacher feedback, but committee members weren't sure what effect their advice had. And to me, that's not adequate for me as a parent to be involved.
Let me just say, the State Board and State Office had access to 4 different drafts over the entire 15-month period. So I don't know what confidentiality was going on, but we had access to those drafts. We knew what we were adopting on first reading in June. Just so you know, the normal process to adopt standards, we followed that normal process. If anything, it was an elongated process. So all the other standards we've adopted have been adopted in similar ways in terms of allowing a public comment period. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the print media to necessarily give all the public notice that we'd like to give. And we do what we can.
This is a good time.
Give you credit for your Facebook announcement on 27th, 2012.
I'll skip ahead to a question here that fits perfectly on this. What are the options going forward for public feedback when it comes to Common Core standards? And if you can, describe the avenues for direct feedback from parents, students, teachers, board members as it moves on up through the chain, and how you feel that process has gone so far, or what could be made better in that process in the future. Start with Alyson and Wendy.
Well, acknowledging that the State Board has the constitutional mandate to adopt standards, what I have found being in public office and also just being starting to become a more politically active citizen is that as a board member, I don't have all the answers, and all of the board members that I work with, while they're wonderful people, they don't have all the answers. And so it becomes very important to have forums like this, because there are people that with vast amounts of knowledge in our public that understand things that we don't know. And that's part of the idea. Yes, I may represent someone, but I can represent them better if I listen and understand. And so while the state board has put together, and they're promoting Common Core, I think it was in August that they talked about having a PR committee to go out and promote Common Core. I would have liked to have seen that. Going forward, whatever standards we adopt, the public needs to be involved, because we as parents, they're our children. We are asking for assistance from the state in the education process, but the state constitution says that I as a parent am primarily responsible, not secondarily responsible for the education of my kids. And in this process, we were kept out of that loop. The state board, they got their drafts, but how much of that information was there? They received the drafts from somewhere else, as opposed to this process coming along through the rank and file of our teachers, our parents, and our public. And I would just say that the big shortcoming was there was not sufficient public involvement. Maybe that's the way it was done, but it shouldn't be done that way in the future.
Well, I appreciate that, but we live in a compound constitutional republic. And as a result, we elect people, and we elect them for certain skills and expertise, and we elect them in reliance upon those individuals doing the groundwork and making decisions. And consequently, the state board process is much like that process. We have no legislature. We do our best to promote and to try to get as much public comment as we can. We can't babysit citizens either. Everyone has to be involved. If you want to be involved, we welcome the participation. We welcome the ability to get additional information, run it by experts in the field, and if there are changes that can be made to the Common Core, we would make them if they are in fact things that make it better. I have in my conversations with Dr. Stotsky, I commented that give me a red line, and I will convene. The state board will convene a blue ribbon panel of our Utah experts, college professors together to vet those, because we want the best standards that we can get. So we're open to getting that, but like I said, we have to rely upon the citizenry to be active as well. We can't make anybody be active in the process. All we can do is provide opportunities for individuals to give us their input.
We did get two questions from. Oh, I'm sorry. One minute rebuttal. Sorry, that's you.
I am so grateful for our compound constitutional republic, and to me that means that I elect people to represent me. I don't consider when I vote for somebody or when they get elected into office that I have given them some kind of power of attorney to act on my behalf with no further input. And I just think that that's an important distinction to make in representative government. I also consider myself an active and an aware citizen involved in my child's school, on the community council, and all those things, and go to some of the most active, involved, politically aware citizens in this state and ask who knew about Common Core before it was a done deal. I think that we're not asking anyone to babysit us, but we've got to be a little bit more transparent. And I think that the problem with the transparency came because this wasn't a process that went through any of the normal local practices.
Option for
It just actually did. We followed the typical process that we have followed in the past. Now, is that process adequate? What I'm hearing you say is that's not an adequate process. But the accusation that we didn't follow a process or tried to sneak something in is just not. It's not an accurate description of our process.
Right. We did get two questions that cannot be asked equally of both groups, but we thought they were extremely relevant questions to ask tonight. So we will throw them in. Instead of asking you each to respond to the same question, we'll give you the standard 2 minutes per question each to respond to. Again, questions that were sent in by parents that are very specific to either those supporting or those with concerns in opposition to Common Core. Starting out, I believe, your turn now. Tammy and Dave, a question that was specific for your take here tonight that was sent by parents was, if Common Core, if we decide that it has gone in the wrong direction, or there's something we're missing, or something that hasn't been covered, or something that we just really made a bad mistake, how quickly can those be spotted? And what is the design? Is there a design mechanism for addressing those types of things inside the Common Core standards?
In terms of the Common Core standards that Utah has adopted, that's now part of our Utah core standards, if we find there are problems within any of the standards, we take it through our typical process, which Tammy has discussed, and we get input from our Office of Education personnel who go out to experts in the field, generally our university professors, but also others, and they take it back to the board. It goes through a committee process, which is the first reading, and then once it goes through a committee process, it goes to the state board for second and third readings. Before it's passed, when we have debates, we publicize our agendas. Individuals can come in, they can email us. We have all of our emails on our website. To have any kind of public input that we can get. Ultimately, we can change the standards when we need to change them.
Just a quick addendum to what David is saying. It would be refreshing for us to hear from the public about a particular standard that they have a concern with. I mean, in second grade, the standard for English language arts where it asked us to do this, we've yet to really hear that, and it would be refreshing for us to hear that and have that brought to the board so that we can actually be discussing the standards, very little of which we've actually been talking about the benchmarks or the expectations for the students.
Thanks, Tammy. The question that was sent in specifically for you, Wendy and Alyson, this again coming from one parent, wanting a mask of each side. The question for you was worded as such: if the state were to unadopt these standards, are you arguing that we should go back to the previous standards, or is there another system that you are arguing would be better going forward?
Really quick, I just think that we have to make this point, that the big question with the Common Core state standards wasn't typical in that we weren't just revising our standards on a 5 to 7 year cycle. The big question was whether or not Utahns wanted to have standards in common with all the other states. So there's kind of a debate back and forth whether that equals de facto national standards or not, but I do think that this is a little bit different because it wasn't just what should we teach in first grade and second grade. The big decision that was made here was whether that we were going to move in lockstep with a large consortium of states. And I think the public deserved a little bit more input on that bigger decision. On the specific standards, I thought our 2007 revision of the math standards was a good start. I think there was some good feedback that could have additionally been implemented in that. I think that there's a couple of other states that had really excellent standards. We could get ideas from that, but my primary concern is that it remains within the control of Utah with the processes that allow public comment that are open to sunshine laws and public availability, and for people to be involved in the development process, not just the yay or nay process.
Additionally, where the Common Core math standards were rated equivalently, and they were beautifully and clearly outlined, very strong in high school, I think that, we already had the math books for that, and we had to reprioritize purchasing more materials to make that switch. That's basically a lateral move according to Fordham Foundation. For English language arts, there were 13 states that Fordham evaluated that gave them a higher ranking than what the Common Core English language arts standards are. And so again, with that greater public input, I think we could find better, higher, clearer standards for English.
Can I ask a sort of follow-up rebuttal question? I didn't quite hear the answer, I think, to the question that I would be interested in hearing tonight, which is, are you asking us to unadopt the Common Core standards? Is that what the ultimate goal is to unadopt the core standards? And if so, what are you suggesting we put in their place?
I don't think it's that easy of a question, because as I've tried to make the point a couple of times, we didn't just adopt standards. We adopted 4 reforms, stimulus-driven reforms, and so it has to happen on a number of different levels. We have to seek congressional relief from No Child Left Behind with the and resolve that problem. We have to decide if we're going to have every test in the nation leading to college aligned with Common Core. If we want to have some kind of a different pathways, it impacts a number of different agreements. So I don't think it's just an up or down vote. Whether we can unadopt, but yes, I would like to see it return to states having states being the laboratories of democracy, if you will, for standards, and have that moving forward, that engine of innovation where we can compare and contrast and have some differentiation and keep moving forward and improving.
Also, another great segue into what will be our second to last question here. We promised there would be time for the audience to talk with you guys. We have room for 2 hours, so 2 more questions here. Along those lines, the ideas of, especially in education, states as a laboratory for democracy. We've pulled several different quotes from Utah lawmakers. Some who have said, absolutely, Common Core maintains and actually encourages this, and some who have said they have concerns similar to some of the bill expressors like Wendy and Alyson, that they worry that Common Core will actually get us away from this. Could you each take 2 minutes to address that specific aspect of this with the idea that states can have a lot of effect on education throughout the country with their own ideas? Starting with Tami Davis.
I'm not sure the points about legislators in Utah, a lot of them are very supportive of our Utah Core standards because they understand that that's the job of the state board is to set those standards. Our children aren't going to all grow up, go to school in Utah, graduate from high school, go to college in Utah, and stay in Utah their whole entire lives. We are a transient, so to speak, society. We are a mobile society. We have students that are going to live here, go to college elsewhere, that are going to be in the workforce elsewhere, internationally, nationally. Do we have the opportunity to prepare those students for that type of education, for those type of experiences after education, or public education? I certainly hope so. I think that's the job of public education. I think that's my job when I look at my neighbors and say, I'm helping provide the very best opportunities for your students after they leave high school in Utah schools. And it's not to keep them into some little dome of we're not caring about anything else that's going on outside of Utah because we don't want to look out there. We are part of this society. The United States, we move, we go across state lines. In fact, one of the organizations that was very strongly supportive of these standards was the Association of Military Families, who said a military child transfers schools about 8 times in their public education career, and going from one state to another where they're never sure where they're going to be in math that year. They're never sure if it's going to be algebra or geometry or what they're learning in that school because the standards are so different. They saw this as a great opportunity for children, a great opportunity for success. And Utah can be part of that success. We can make sure our children are part of that success.
There will be plenty of time afterwards.
This goes back to what standards are versus curriculum, I think. Standards are a scope and a sequence. It's what, kind of the framework of what we'll cover, and the order or the grade in which we'll cover it. So what's left to innovate within that is pretty narrow. What books, what textbooks you choose. One blogger made this analogy, saying it's kind of like, telling a prisoner, you haven't taken away his ability to walk. He can walk wherever he wants as long as he stays inside the prison cell. I think anyone who's been involved in education long enough realizes that there's really a lot of different approaches to teaching math, to teaching language arts, what grades you introduce, what's developmentally appropriate. One of the biggest criticisms of Common Core has come from cognitive development experts, saying some of the ways that we're asking kids to demonstrate their knowledge through the early grade standards are not developmentally appropriate. That's something I've experienced firsthand with my kids in the younger grades. But this idea that we have to all be the same to be good, I reject that as a true premise. I know that there are kids who move from state to state while in school, and that's a difficult challenge for them. By census data, it's less than 2% of our population that is affected, and I think that we can have, just like Gordon rated our 2007 math standards as an A-, and the Common Core math standards as an A-, that proves that you can have different variations of standards that are still comparable in maybe the quality or preparation for higher learning. One size fits all is not an approach that fits children. That's common standards are designed for data, for conformity, for efficient markets, not for kids.
I'm going to have to disagree. I think one of the biggest myths and misconceptions and misrepresentations being made about the Common Core standards is that they are a one-size-fits-all. They are minimum expectations. It's like sending your child to second grade and asking the teacher, what are we going to learn this year? What's my child going to learn this year? And have the parent or the teacher say, gee, I don't know. It's going to kind of depend on what the other kids feel like this year and the group I got to work with this year and kind of how I feel about things. I don't know. It's second grade. We'll see how it goes. We would never stand for that. When we go to second grade, we say, well, your child's going to learn how to identify the important parts of the story. They're going to start learning to add single-digit numbers or whatever it might be. They're minimum standards. One of the most successful educators here in the Logan School District, David Long, who was the principal at Bridger Elementary for several years, which was a distinguished Title I school nationally, said that the more we go toward core standards, the more opportunity we have to individualize instruction. This is coming from an educator who's done this for years. You ask teachers, are they producing one-size-fits-all students? Absolutely not. It is just absolutely not true.
Let me take a moment here, moderator's privilege, if you would, because we did get a lot of questions along these lines, and I am unclear, so I'm making the assumption that others will. But for you, Wendy and Alyson specifically, could you, in a minute or in one sentence, whichever you prefer, could you describe the alternative you seek?
I think what just occurred here is the Latin rhetoric of reductio ad ridiculum, that you reduce something that your opponent says to a kind of ridiculous extreme example to take away any validity of what they're saying.
Alyson, let me jump in because we're short on time. The question is, could you describe your alternative? Because it is concerning. I don't want to pick on you guys, and believe me, I'll pick on them right after. But it's something that I feel I'm not getting an answer to. It was something that many of our parents sent me.
Well, I can't respond to what she said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I thought
okay,
you
sorry.
passed on her about
I
it.
thought I could respond to what she said.
No, go ahead. Take a minute.
It's just what Wendy said before, that just because we don't like uniform national standards or uniform, we don't want to use the word national, uniform standards across all 50 states, 45 states, that we don't want standards, that we don't want our kids to learn to add and subtract. Our point is that different states have had different approaches with different successes, and I find value in being able to compare and contrast different approaches to teaching math. I have 4 kids. I think they all learn very differently. One approach with math might work really well with my kid, and that includes what age, when I would introduce that, and how I might introduce that. In terms of cognitive development, they've challenged whether or not it's realistic for someone learning multiplication to be able to explain why 3 times 3 equals 9, as Tammy used that example. It's kind of a byproduct of learning that. I think kids get that, but expecting that to be a demonstration of proficiency at this grade level is not realistic.
And let me apologize again for interrupting you. I thought you were telling me about it. So now, moderator's privilege here. Moderator's privilege here. Just to give you the chance to explain it. If you can take a minute, or again, if you'd like to go 1 second, what is, if you can, a preferable alternative to the Common Core standards?
Well, I think we've addressed some options. The biggest concern that I have with this is that it's not just a set of standards. And the fact that if the state board had adopted a set of standards in a vacuum outside of this push with 45 states all doing it at the same time, it has a completely different response. What we are doing by adopting this with 45 other states at the same time is we are creating essentially a single pathway to educational success and economic success. Because we've got all these 45 states all going down this path at the same time. Your curriculum materials are going to align. Your ACT and your SAT are aligning. And so after 4 or 5 years, what are the other options? Your publishers are not going to be producing, one-ofs over here when they got 45 states and they've got this market. And then once you have this, who has of those 45 states, who's going to be able to have the ability to get out of that, because it sets the standard for the federal government to come in, like with No Child Behind, and say, well, you guys have already adopted all of those anyway, now we're going to, up the ante a little bit. The concern is the monolithic idea of it.
Sure. In the interest of fairness, since I picked on that, the question that popped into my head, let me throw it out that has popped into my head for you, Tammy and Dave. Again, 1 minute here. Why has it been so difficult? There is a challenge for parents, I think, to find information, specifically through channels they're used to. One email that we did get, a parent described that she was always having to go to a teacher, who could then go to the administration of the school, who could then go to the school board or the state school board, on up until the answer was eventually found. And she expressed frustration at not being able to go through those channels to get answers about the Common Core standards. Can you speak to that?
And certainly we could have done a better job in terms of rolling it out with our website. And we've been working on that in order that parents could go to the state board website and get those kinds of answers without having to go through the bureaucracy, as it were. And certainly like I said, we're working on that. We're trying to get better at that. That's one of the reasons why we have a communications person to try to help provide that kind of information in a more simplified format, more transparency in terms of getting those questions answered.
Okay, in the interest of wrapping things up here again, to leave time for you all out there in the audience to speak with everyone up here on the stage tonight. First, let me say thank you to Alyson, Wendy, Dave, and Tammy. It's very brave to get up here and answer these questions. I know that you're speaking, all of you are speaking for a very large, very broad, complex issue that has no easy answers. And so I admire you all for taking it on tonight. Final question, and again, in a way, a closing statement. This was a theme that popped up again and again as we asked around, as we solicited email from our listeners, or even took calls on air on KVNU for people to talk about Common Core standards. And the theme, again and again and again, seems to be a concern on the side of both supporters and those who are in opposition that we haven't covered every base, that we haven't thought of every aspect of this, that there's something we're really going to regret or something we're missing now that we wish we had done in the future. So in the interest of, with keeping in mind a closing statement response to this, if you could detail your perfect system and how we might be able to get from where we are now to there. And starting with, I believe, Alyson and Wendy this time.
A point of clarification, is this our closing response?
Yes, in the form of answering a question, a closing response. We want to basically, to restate the question more simply, if you could just if you wave a magic wand and create a system that is perfect for your interests and needs and what you think is best, what would that system look like, and how can you imagine us getting from where we are now to there?
Okay. Good to know, like 2 days ago. I think the question before us is ultimately who is in control of our children's education. That's the big concern. And as I mentioned before, the shift to the Common Core from where I stand is a huge lurch away from the bottom-up local control, parents being involved, and it's top-down centralized control. And the more we have that top-down centralized control, we've got all 45 states doing standards and tests and curriculum and the ACT and the SAT all at the same time, it creates a monolithic pathway, a single pathway. Those are some of the concerns of private homeschoolers. My kid's going to have to learn how to do all of this and jump through all these hoops in order to be able to pass the ACT and get into college. You're creating a single pathway. Creating that single pathway eliminates the availability of innovation, and it creates a centralized control system that allows for a few well-placed people like Bill Gates to be able to come in and influence public policy. When you diversify the power and everything else down to the local level, and the most local level possible at your boards, your local boards even. State boards can have very, very broad standards, but the local boards should have much more ability to tailor what is going on. And we're told that that's true, but I do believe from what I'm reading that that's where it's at. I would just like to close with a quote from Thomas Jefferson. He says, if it is believed that these elementary schools will be better managed by, and he gives a list of government entities or any other general authority of the government, than by the parents within each ward, it is a belief against all experience. And he says, no, the way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many. And Common Core violates both of those principles. That parents have been taken out of the equation, and it's been sent up the line. It is centralized. How do I, as a parent, have control? And then it is centralized power in education, so that if I have a great idea, I have to just go to these particular players and get it done. But it's not diversified. And I would like to stand on the side of parents and teachers and local school districts having much more control than what we do now.
Thank you, Wendy. Same question for John.
We'll divide it between Dave and I just quickly. I also believe that parents and local school districts, charters, and teachers should have control. Speaking from here at Mount Logan Middle School, the localist of local control, I wanted to read this quote from an educator here who sent me this comment. He said, I felt enormous and demoralizing amounts of restriction and top-down control under No Child Left Behind mandates when I taught 5th grade. I don't feel that at all with the language arts Common Core. I think the key to keep in mind is that it is a core, like the core of an apple. There is still an enormous amount of fruit that is entirely up to me as an educator to build. I have flexibility in how I meet the standards, and I love that the Common Core doesn't dictate reading lists. The language arts Common Core strikes a healthy balance between having common objectives without robbing teachers, schools, or communities of autonomy. That's coming from the local teacher here at Mount Logan Middle School. This is what I'm hearing from teachers. This is what I'm hearing from parents.
And just so you know, in terms of what we would envision as the perfect scenario, the reality is in 2020, 66% of all the jobs in Utah are going to require some kind of post-secondary certificate or diploma. And right now, we're at 43%. And if we don't get to the 66%, it's going to impact our way of life here. Jobs that would be here are going to go elsewhere. In order to increase those numbers in terms of post-secondary education, it starts with standards, and from standards it goes to curriculum, from curriculum to the test, and we're controlling the test as well, in order to make sure those standards have in fact been accomplished by our students. And then ultimately from there, it's the ACT and SAT tests. Those are the college tests. Those are the gold standard in college and career readiness. They have a line to the Common Core. And certainly using those tests to get into college, to not have students, which right now 40% of our students are taking remedial math and English language arts, getting away from that and having them prepared for college and getting those degrees. That's the ultimate goal.
All right. Thank you again. Okay, now you can applaud. I think at a certain point in the planning of this whole thing, I promised I wouldn't do what I'm about to do. But is Lee Alder somewhere in here? Is he sitting down? There you are. Could you stand up for a second? Lee did all of the legwork on this event, planning it, organizing it, getting everyone up there on the stage to find a night when we could all do it, talking me into it. So everybody, please I think I promised I would not do that. Thanks to our panelists, all of you guys. Again, this was brave. And we do, I don't think they're going to rush us out of here. We do at least officially have the room for another 30 minutes. So all of our panelists here have agreed to stick around and answer questions. Thanks also to the timekeepers here, man. Amazing job on this. Not a second off. So thanks for everyone showing up tonight. I hope this has been informative. Again, the panelists will still be here to answer more specific questions if you have them and provide many websites from both sides. No. Would you like to say something specific?
Well, I would like